and welcome to the latest episode of Leading at a Local Level, which is a Mission Life Grace podcast. Before we jump into the latest episode, we wanted to share with you a little bit of our heart and our vision behind the podcast. John and I are passionately committed to equipping leaders and to helping create healthy teams. Because we believe that when leaders are equipped, when they've got confidence, when they know what they're meant to be doing, when they're building healthy teams that are able to function well together, that will strengthen, it will encourage, and it will enable the church to fulfill its God-given mission to reach a lost world with Jesus Christ. And so what we do is we've been sitting down together, just talking through different issues that you, the listener, have sent in to us. So thank you for those of you that have sent in your questions. We haven't been able to get to them all. We will just work through them as we go along. But if you've got a question or an issue you'd like us to consider and talk through, then please do just get in touch. You can drop a comment in our YouTube channel. You can send us an email, which we'll put the link to down below. But we really wanted to take this podcast a step further, because you can only do so much when you're just on a podcast. And so we want to offer, John and I want to offer for free, that if you would like as a leader just to talk to us, to maybe get some advice or some input, we'd love to chat to you. And we'd also really love to come and work with your team. We'd love to do some workshops or facilitate some conversations around how you can be a healthier team, or how we can equip you as a leader or as a leadership team. And so if you're interested in that, if you'd like us to maybe come and just see how we can support you, then please do just send us an email. Send it to tim.cross@riverchurch or river-church.co.uk. And we would just love to be able to support, to be able to equip you, to be able to help you build a healthy team, because we really are most committed to seeing God strengthen, encourage and enable the church to fulfill its God-given mission to reach a lost world with Jesus Christ. So we're going to jump in to today's episode. We hope you enjoy it, and thank you so much for listening. If you don't already, we'd love you just to subscribe or just to get the latest updates on when we release our videos. Bless you. Hello, welcome to our next episode of Leading at a Local Level with myself. I'm Tim, and this is my friend John.
Right.
Good stuff. And this podcast is about trying to equip leaders at a local level, particularly with a focus on trying to equip leaders so they can help to build and foster and grow healthy churches. So that's what we're going to be doing today. And today we're going to be talking about the subject of buy-in. What do you mean by buy-in, John? What we talk about buy-in.
Buy-in, yeah. Well, this comes from actually somebody who listens / watches us, who basically said, how can I get buy-in from people and then take them with me? And they went on to say this is something that you never really see taught with leadership stuff, but hugely important. And I think that's why we should address it today, really, Tim, because we're not here to kind of give loads of leadership content that you can get elsewhere. We're here to really apply things, aren't we, to what it looks like in a local church to actually practically do this stuff. What does it look like to be healthy in leadership? And I think this issue of buy-in is huge. Like the number of leaders I've spoken to kind of find it quite frustrating when they have this great idea, this light bulb moment, and they share it with other people and they just don't quite get it, or they don't quite follow, or they think they've got buy-in, they think that people have said, yeah, this is a great idea, and then they don't. And again, for me, an example would be when I was leading in our church in Canterbury, we're moving towards our services being more seeker friendly, basically. So again, whatever you think of that theologically, try and park that, but that's what we were looking to do. And we thought that we had buy-in from people, from key people in the worship band, the welcome groups and so on, and life groups. But actually over time we realized that a lot of people didn't want to see that change, and actually they wanted things to stay just as they were. And so I remember that was a real challenge to think, well, hang on, I thought I had buy-in, and we thought we were taking people with us on this journey as a church, but then realized that they weren't. And it started getting me thinking, what are the factors? How can I take people with me as a leader? I mean, I don't know if you've got any examples, Tim. Does that sort of hit what you've experienced?
My favorite leadership phrase, I might have even used it on this podcast before, is that a man leading without anybody following is just a man taking a walk. And I think it's kind of,
Yeah.
I think often there's lots of people that call themselves leaders and have the title of leaders, but there aren't many people following them. And I suppose the definition of being a leader is that people are following you somewhere.
Yeah.
I think it's a massive issue, John. I think it's a great issue to raise, to be honest, because I think so many leaders have like they don't lack for quality ideas. They don't lack for kind of passion, enthusiasm, vision. They just don't have often there's a disconnect, isn't there, between kind of them and everybody else. And so what happens is they kind of run off ahead, and then lots of people just don't follow. Or what happens is you kind of get this kind of group of stragglers, people you get people that are really keen, that are kind of with you, and you think, oh great, everyone's behind you, and you turn around and realize that actually you've left a whole load of people behind. And I mean, this has never happened in my leadership, obviously. I've never had this problem. People just, I'm absolutely so magnetic that people are always surrounding me. But yeah, it's huge. I think it works in everything. I think it works in politics. You look at national leaders. You look at, it works in football teams. It works in all forms. You can, that disconnect. In a sense, that's it. That is leadership. How do you get someone to buy into what you're doing? It's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right that when you look around, there's sometimes people far behind. And reflecting on this, I was thinking of change innovation. So when people talk about how people adopt new ideas, so for example, like a new iPhone comes out, and you've always got those people who kind of hear an idea and they adopt it straight away. So they're there in the queue overnight. And I'd never do this. I'm not like this with technology. I sort of wait for a little bit. I'm like, is it worth the money? I want to wait for the price to come down.
You've still got a Nokia 3210, John.
I've still got a Nokia 3210. I'm still not convinced by the whole smartphone concept. I'm waiting for the prices to come down. But no, I'm a Moto G guy because, it kind of looks all right. Not that I'm that bothered. Does the job, but it's, 140 quid compared to 700. But that's me. But there were some people who are super early. And actually, you may have them in your church where you say an idea, and they're there right away. They're like, great idea, I'm with you. And that's a tiny number of people, but there are those kind of really early adopters. And I think it actually fits. I mean, there's a curve, we call it a bell curve, like, one of those ones where it's a big bell in the middle. Yeah, with the tails. And that first tail is like those early adopters who are like, yes, I'm there. I'm with you. And then you've got your kind of early and late majority, so people perhaps like me who are just waiting to see if other people are going to follow.
Do you know Tano, don't you? You know Tano in my church?
Yeah.
So Tano in my church is the classic example of like an early adopter. Tano's always first. Like if you present a new idea to Tano, nearly always he's like, I love this idea. I'm super enthusiastic. Like he's always the person to go to, isn't it? I think as a leader, we do you not think you're drawn to those kind of people? Always want to tell them your idea because you know that they're probably going to be really enthusiastic straight away. But I think that's what a lot of leaders do. I think they find people that are like that, and they assume that just because those people are enthusiastic, like that everyone's enthusiastic. But in reality, that I don't think those people are necessarily that representative. Do you not think?
You're right, but also what can happen, to be honest, is that those people at the other end of the curve, the late adopters or laggards, I think they're called. Sometimes I can have some built-in resentment towards people like that because I'm thinking, oh, you never want to change, or you're always saying no, and you're never buying into these ideas. Just you've always got a critical point, or maybe not critical, but you're always asking me questions and making me work harder, and I just want you to buy in, for goodness sake, to what I'm doing. But I think I'm learning, hopefully, more and more to recognize why I should value people like that there is value, that sometimes they represent a group of people in my congregation or where I am who are a bit change averse, and they do have more questions, and perhaps they've actually got some really valuable things to play in to the process. So I think it sounds awful, like trying to categorize people in your church, but I kind of learned to do that a little bit and recognize if I'm sitting down with this group of people who are these laggards, and if I present a new idea, John, don't be surprised if they turn around and say, don't like it, I'm not up for it. Don't go away all disappointed and upset, because expect it to happen. So I started to learn which people are going to respond in which way, and then how I might kind of approach it. And I don't know if you've experienced that Tim, and how you approach it, apart from just sticking with the early adopters who are always like,
Yeah, I'm sure you're going to talk about that curve a bit more, and maybe we'll see if we can get a graphic onto this video. I'll see if I can do some kind of video editing to shove one in. I think it's quite helpful to see the graphic, because the problem is, I think a lot of leaders just almost see it as being those two groups. There's those people that are for you and those people that are against you. And I think, as you're going to talk about, probably, I would imagine that there's all the people in the middle that are actually more important than the people at the beginning and the people at the end. I think my experience is that there aren't that many. Was it laggards you call them?
Laggards, yeah.
That's
awful, isn't it?
Laggard. I was thinking
laggard.
Proverbs 6. Go to the laggard.
That's right. You sluggard.
I think there aren't that many laggards, to be honest. I mean, I'm sure there are some that are just going to object to everything you do. But I almost wonder if that's a bit of a stereotype. I actually think most people are. I think the reality is most people don't like change. Not many people like change. And I think you have to. A lot of those laggards aren't necessarily really genuine, deep down anti-changes. They're just naturally fearful, or whatever. And so I think. Yeah, I mean, I think the danger is when you talk about buying is that we look at those two people, and I think I've done that a lot of times. I think when I was, leading in Eltham, and we were trying to do a few things in Eltham at the time, and I think I certainly boxed people into people that were for you, and then people that were basically like not for you. And actually, I don't think that was a helpful way of thinking about it. I think actually that just in the long term. Yeah,
you're right. And the majority, that's the shape of the bell curve, is probably about 2/3 of people are actually in the middle. And they will, sometimes they're looking to the early adopters to kind of say, is this something that we go with? So I think there is value in actually going to early adopters. I mean, you've talked before a few years ago, Tim, I remember talking about megaphones, where it can be helpful to go to people who are going to be able to be the megaphones to talk about the ideas. And we've done that in our church, where we say, okay, we're not trying to manipulate people. We're just also recognizing that it takes time for ideas to settle in. And it takes time for people to get their heads around it and to discuss it and to ask their questions, and to see that it isn't just one person kind of going off like me, going off in that direction, but actually there's been some thought and process, and people need that time. And I think people act logically. And I think that's a huge lesson I've learned, is that people aren't illogical. People do act kind of rationally, and if they've got fears about change and they've got questions, then my job as a leader is to kind of maturely just say, okay, we need to address that, and I need to wait and recognize that I'm in a rush, but sometimes I need to wait a bit longer.
I think that's really useful, actually, understanding the kind of logical side of things. But just, can I wind it back a bit? You're to this point about megaphones, because I think there are certain people that are like that. Say if you categorize your early adopters into two types of people. So you've got your early adopters that are just super enthusiastic, but they're not necessarily like going to talk about it. They're just with you. Whatever's happening, they're with you. And there are a few, and they're quite precious people, really. They will not only adopt what you're doing, they'll shout about it. And if those people are credible people, they become incredibly valuable. I mean, I remember there was a guy that I used to lead with years ago. It was a guy called Steve. And when I was in my early days of leading the youth group, and Steve was like a megaphone. And so whatever I did, Steve was pretty much up for it. And he was the one that would go around telling everyone how amazing it was and how great it was. And actually, I realized he was as important as I was in terms of kind of, essentially getting that voice out. There's another guy, you know Alan Maxwell, don't you, in Eltham?
Yeah.
Alan Maxwell. We love Alan Maxwell.
We love Alan.
And my friend Alan, and he's Scottish. But the thing about Alan is just so enthusiastic about stuff. He's an early adopter, sure. And Alan's just like really well respected. He's really enthusiastic, and you kind of think like, Alan's a great example of someone that you want on your team, and you want to give them space, I guess, to amplify what you're doing, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, look, there's something I'd love for us to maybe look at on, I think on another podcast. It's probably too much for today. But this kind of links as well with understanding how we speak. I mean, there's a term I'm going to use is this: it's understanding your voice. So I speak to people, and I love to enthuse people, and I'm a bit of a pioneer in that sense. So when someone kind of listens and responds to the way that I'm phrasing things, I might get quite excitable. I might talk about, we're going to be doing this, and this is going to be the impact on the kingdom. And I'm thinking, surely everybody's going to get excited by the way I'm presenting this vision. Yeah, surely this has excited me, so why wouldn't it excite you? And then there's somebody like, and I won't, well, I will pick it up, but my wife, who's very different to me, and she might start asking questions like, yeah, but have you thought about so and so and what that will mean for them in their role in the children's work? It's going to change. And you're basically kind of presenting this vision, but you haven't actually thought about how it's going to impact that family or that person's role. And I suddenly realized that, I need to kind of address this in a different way. And that's where having your megaphones, this is the point I'm making, that's where having megaphones is having people who speak in a different language as well to you, who get the idea, who are behind you and who are for you, but who can speak to those people in a different voice, if you like, and say, yeah, okay, I hear you. And I'm going to kind of translate it down for you to show, actually, we've thought about this. We've thought about, how we're going to look after people in this process. Does that make sense? And if you've experienced that?
It does. And I'm sure, like as you say, we should probably do another video on what you're talking about there, because I think there's quite a lot in there. And it's a bit like the Myers-Briggs personality type, isn't it?
Yeah.
Different people think in different ways. But just to kind of blunt it down to a really blunt kind of measure, I suppose if you think about it as being people that are logical or people that are emotional, for example, let's take that as a very broad, generalistic way. I mean, I think that's what you're driving at, isn't it? Is that there's some people that are going to process are going to buy in intellectually, and some are going to buy in emotionally, and some are going to, I guess, be somewhere between the two. And I think that part of the problem is that that leaders, I think, need to potentially, I think that's something I've learned. I think this is what you're talking about, isn't it? Is the idea you've got to work out really what is it that person needs to hear to be able to buy in. So, for example, for some people, they're very logical. So they're thinking like, I don't know, taking like, so we want to take on an intern or a couple of interns in our church in the summer. So if you know anyone, by the way, if anyone's watching this, you know someone that's kind of, sort of looking to do a year of kind of low paid but paid work in a church supporting children's and youth work, let me know. Shameless plug. But if I went to our trustees and I said, this is what I want to do. So some people responded with the kind of questions about, well, how much is it going to cost? Where are they going to live? Kind of what's going to be the impact of this on this? And so they're approaching it from a very logical point of view. The other people are kind of just responding from an emotional level, like, we need some help. It'd be great to have some more people involved. It'd be really good. And I think, trying to understand, because sometimes I think I've approached it and I'm quite emotional. I'm emotional. I think I don't know what you are, actually. I don't know whether you're emotional or more logical, but I'm definitely emotional, aren't I? So I'm basically going to get excited by something because I just sense the vision and the passion in it. And so I'll often go to people and be like, why are you not as excited about this as me? This is the most exciting thing that's ever happened. And I used to come up, particularly in my early days of leadership, and realizing that I'm still not good at it at times, but realizing if I want to talk to this person, I need to work out what their objections are going to be, I guess. What do they need? What is going to excite them? Is the practical stuff going to excite them, or is it going to be the vision? Absolutely. Or is it going to be but I mean, I don't know if that's how you deal with it, but that's how I deal with it. I think
absolutely. And knowing key people who can speak. And I remember that moment where one of our fellow elders kind of stood up and presented things. And in my opinion, be really honest, it was a bit dry and a bit, I just felt a bit bored, to be honest, listening to him. But it was helpful. And there was a whole load of people in the church like, it was so helpful. What so-and-so always says, never what so-and-so said. And I just loved the way he kind of communicated it. It was very gentle. And I thought, right, John, lesson learned, this is not all about you. And I think that's what we've got to be careful with buying. If we're like, I'm the big leader and I expect everyone to follow me. But actually, I believe passionately in this plurality of leadership. And I believe in it theologically, but actually also quite pragmatically, because I've just seen that it works when you've got people who are different. And that's a challenge as well for our leadership mixes, to be ready to work with leadership groups who are different, who may not all be like you and think in the same way, who challenge sometimes, or who maybe takes a bit more work to kind of grapple with things as a leadership team. But it is worth every minute of it.
Do you know, I think one of the challenges around this, though, John, is that it's a bit of a craft. It's an art form rather than science. And so I think if you were, and I think, it's, I'm just thinking out loud, really. But like, I think that's one of the challenges that we want to sort of approach it like a science. Like if I want to get elder, Elder Alan on board, or if I want to get kind of, I'm thinking about elders I've worked with, elders, Elder Patrick, then I maybe need to approach it like this. But it doesn't always work like that. Sometimes, and I think this is where, I suppose, as a leader, I think you probably need to spend a lot of time before you present an idea, particularly if it's a big idea. Kind of really thinking through kind of what their objections are going to be, like what is likely to motivate them, what is likely to engage them. And it might seem like a waste of time, but probably that's the most important thing you can do if you're with your key people, is to think about, how do I present this to them? Because here's a silly thing. I've worked out that with me and my wife, right? I don't know if you have this, but do you need to give the point at the end of the story, or do you need to give the backstory first, right?
Yeah.
So with my wife, she likes to tell me the full story, and I'm just sitting there going, please tell me the point. What's the conclusion? What did they say at the end? What actually happened? Like, what's the outcome here? I want to know the end before I get to the beginning. And one thing I've started to do is I've started to work out, because I used to often go into leadership conversations, I'd sort of really try and explain the full story and explain why I was thinking what I was thinking, because I was thinking like they're going to want to understand the process. But actually, nearly always, often I've worked out, well, not all, nearly always, but sometimes with some people, you're like, let me tell you what I'm thinking, and then I'll explain to you why it's important. So little things like that I do, and I will try and work out, like, how are they likely to react to what I'm saying. I suppose if we take away a lesson from this, how do you get buy-in? It is, spend some time thinking about how you're going to communicate to those people,
and recognizing that often as a leader, you've been mulling over this stuff for months, possibly years, but certainly weeks. You've been thinking about it, and if you present it to people and expect that after one or two conversations or one or two kind of announcements that they're going to get it and that they're going to feel it, it's just not going to happen. I mean, if it's taken you that amount of time, it's going to take others time. And so sometimes I speak to myself, John, it's about patience. Like you're wanting to just rush ahead with this idea, and thinking that sometimes it can be tempting to think, well, because I've got a leadership position, then people should, I expect people to follow me because I'm an elder, or I'm the pastor. And that we'd love that to be the case sometimes in leadership. Wouldn't life be easier if people just followed? But of course, it's not like that, and rightfully so.
How early would you involve someone in the conversation, John? Like, so if you're in your idea process, how early would you involve?
Well, I think it depends on, again, I don't think it's as scientific as that. I think it depends on the issue. It depends on who the issue impacts. So if it's a small tweak, as in like we're going to change the structure of our, prayer meetings or leadership meetings, then, all the way through to something really big about we're going to plant another church, I think they're just completely different things. So I think it will all depend on what the decision is that you're making, who it impacts, and speaking with the people. And I would always say I would go earlier than later. So I tend to wait longer. So my that's my instinct. So I know that I need to deliberately try and involve people earlier. I mean, how about you?
See, I think that's, I'm many things as a leader, but I think, and many things I'm bad at. But I think the one thing that I'm particularly good at, I think, is that I like to, maybe because I like to talk, John, as you know. I find actually that the best thing I do in leadership is just have like light touch conversations with people.
Yeah.
So I often present it like, this is my very half-formed idea. What do you kind of think? And I think that's been very effective in my leadership over the last few years, for a number of reasons. One, I think it makes people feel like you're not trying to persuade them of an idea. You're trying to involve them in the process, which I think is very important. But I also think it helps to shape the actual idea itself, because there's no point in getting to the point where it's fully formed and then realizing that you've built a coffee table that's too big for the space. You almost need to be measured. Does that make sense? And I would say, like, so we were talking about, say we were readjusting our home groups. I'll go around and I'll talk to probably 10 people within the church. and sort of just sound them out about what do you think about how are you finding house groups? What do you think? Well, how would you change it? I'm kind of thinking that we might like do this, thinking about maybe change the number of groups or something. And what do you think about that? And I found that, to be honest, that's the probably the one. If I could say one thing to leaders, that would almost be top of my list. I think just have as many conversations, as many smaller conversations as you possibly can, and because if you leave it until you've built the whole thing, and then you're trying to convince people that what you've built is like, whereas actually what you're saying is come and build together, which is not easy. Actually, some people find that much more difficult. I think because if you're an internal processor. Do you not think if you process things internally, it's much harder to do it with others? I think I can do it externally with others. You know?
It will also shape what type of church you're looking to build. To be honest with you, if you're and that will. So if you're basically saying as a leader, part of my role is to develop leaders, and we believe in that, don't we? Healthy churches need healthy leaders. Now, if you're the sort of person who says, I've got all the ideas, I'm the anointed one for this ministry, people just need to listen. You will probably gather around, if you do gather people, you'll probably gather people who are quite happy with that kind of thing. They are happy with, pastor-led kind of like, I'm just going to follow this one person, whatever happens, whatever they say. And that's the kind of church you'll build. But if you're wanting to develop your leaders and you're wanting to develop leaders who think and who learn and who grow, then involving them in the process and talking them through it. This is why I'm doing it, and this is how I'm taking people with me. And do you know what? I've made this terrible mistake this week. I'm going to share it with you. Right? It takes humility, but it develops leaders, and I think it's worth it.
Yeah, I think it builds trust, doesn't it? It builds trust in you. I think we think that people take trust from us because we know what we're doing. Yeah. I think people kind of intuitively know that you don't really know what you're doing as a leader. Like, you don't really know what you're doing. You're kind of you're following the Lord.
Said it. Can we wipe that bit out?
But we spiritualize it, John. We're all just following the Lord, and we're doing we're in step with Him. But I realize often I don't know what I'm doing. But I think actually they trust. In the end, people trust. I think people trust you as a man of integrity, but they also trust your process. Yeah. So I think if they feel like your process is fluid, they're more likely to trust you because they know that they can help to shape it if they think it's going to go wrong. If it's rigid and it's heading towards disaster, that's what causes fear, because they think, goodness me, this guy gets stuck on an idea. And once he gets stuck on that idea, it's very hard to change him. And I think this is going to end badly. And I just think therefore we're going to hit the wall because he's rigid. He doesn't move. We can't input really. He's just looking for us to get on board. He's asking us to get on the bus, even though the bus is heading over a cliff. Yeah. Whereas you don't mind getting on the bus if you think you've got an opportunity to help steer it. I'm just making those analogies up as we've got along. I've just mixed that.
This is great. We'll make some notes in the show notes, like the best of, and Tim's analogies,
Tim's metaphors.
Metaphors. Look, I think trust is so key. And if people think you're using them, just to achieve your ends, or this is your vision, and we're just going to be used, your trust can ebb away. And I liken trust to change in my pocket, and I got that from Eric, who's pastor of our church in Canterbury. And I remember this when he was said to us, how much change have we got in our pocket at the moment? And I was like, what are you talking about? I only carry cards. But he likened trust to change in your pocket, and you build that up over time, and you're making decisions that people say, okay, that was, I trust this guy, or I trust this woman. I trust their process, this leadership team. And it does mean that there are times when you may need to make a big decision. And yes, you can go for all those other things, but sometimes it's about knowing whether you've got change in your pocket for that decision. So for us, we've made changes to our approach, and actually it went well. In the end, I think the process went really well for some of the reasons I've mentioned. We then had to make a very quick decision about moving site. A site came up, which the church is still using now in Canterbury, and it needed a really quick decision. And we decided as a leadership that we did a quick consultation as much as we could, but we made the decision. I tell you what, if the decision had gone wrong, it would have been really disastrous for the church. But actually, it went well. But we had the change in our pocket, if you like, to make that decision. We felt that if it didn't work too well, then actually we'd still have people's trust, because they'd recognise we had to make a decision. They'd recognise. Does that kind of, again? resonate with you
Funny,
too?
Eric obviously stole it from me. He's adapted my analogy. I talk a lot about bank accounts. Like it's a bit
Right.
like a bank account. You build up money in the bank, and you don't want to go into the red. And if you spend too much, if you make a bad decision, or if you have to act quickly, you can use up some of your change in your pocket credit. Absolutely, it's a great analogy, and
Yeah.
I think actually, yeah, and this is one of the biggest challenges, and I have seen this a number of times. I think that what happens, you see it with football managers, don't you? Right?
Yeah.
That after a while, they get to a point where the elastic snaps. Right? So
No names
trust.
mentioned.
There's been too many times when they've just not got buy-in, and the leaders pushed ahead. And you can see it with someone like, take Mourinho, like when he was in his various different football clubs.
Yeah.
He does well for a while, and after a while, suddenly, like, you make too many bad decisions. You treat people too badly after a while. You don't get it right, and after a while, people are, I can't deal with this anymore. So I'm just not going to buy in at all. I've got no trust in what you're going to say. I've got no trust in what you're going to do. And so I can't get enthusiastic. And so you get some leaders that get to a point where they're just like, everything I try, it's really hard to get buy-in. And your people are almost, they're just not that interested, because they're like, we've heard it all before. We've seen it. We've seen you do it before. We've seen it fail. We've seen it crash, or you didn't involve us last time. So why should we bother again this time? And I think that's a really dangerous situation. And I think sadly, too many leaders end up in that situation, and at that point, you either leave, or the church just grinds itself into a rut.
I was going to say to him, how do you get out? Because obviously in football, as Mourinho's found, you kind of get sacked. The players rebel a little bit, and we can all tell where this one's heading. Which, when it came to Tottenham, I was just delighted, personally, as an Arsenal fan. But in the local church, you've said it really. A couple of outcomes. One is that the leader or people leave, or you kind of grind. How do you get out of that? I mean, perhaps as leaders who are listening or watching this who are thinking, I feel I'm a bit in that position, actually. Like I've got there, I've got there, and that elastic kind of a stretching point. How do you rein that back, do you think?
I don't know. I'm really tempted to be controversial. And I think I would seriously consider whether it's time to leave. Okay. Which probably isn't probably the answer that people would want to hear. But I think, unless the Lord, I suppose this is my experience, unless God moves in that situation, trust is very hard to win back. And it's like, there's a difference between I've lost, as you said, it's like the bank thing. It's like, you can go into the red a couple of times, if you get yourself back out of the red, or, if you put change back in your pocket. Yeah. But sometimes I just wonder if there comes a point where, unless the Lord does something, it's just, I don't know, it doesn't matter what you're going to do, that you just get frustrated. You get more and more frustrated because people, and it just gets worse and worse. I suppose my experience is I haven't seen anybody where I've obviously, my role in MLG is I support a lot of churches. Yeah. And I haven't yet seen, and talking to lots of other people in other churches, I haven't yet seen examples of where I've really seen it turn around. I have seen people move on and be very successful somewhere else. But I don't know, John. Would you give the other side to that argument, John? Because that's not the whole argument.
Well, I wasn't driving at that really. I think you're right. I sadly also lack examples of where I've seen it really turn around. I would say sometimes that can be, I wonder what that's sometimes to do with our view of leadership. It's almost like, we think we can never trust this person again because, they just haven't proven themselves. Right. I think there must be room for conversations where, very honest conversations where things are acknowledged, where people can ask for forgiveness where there's forgiveness needed. Yeah. And sometimes just say, do you know what, actually, and it's really hard to do in leadership, but to turn around and say, do you know what, there's some ways I've been approaching this, it just actually haven't been right. And I know that, for example, I just haven't been listening. And I want to listen. And I want to do this together. But that's really hard to do as a leader. And as I say, I don't really have any great examples of where that's happened.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that's probably pretty much the only way you could do it, I think, is where you were basically willing to go and say, I've been wrong. I've tried to push the church in a direction that the church didn't want to go in, for example. But the difficulty is often you've got someone that believes that they want to go in one direction because they feel that the Lord's told them to do that, and the church hasn't, for whatever reason, particularly bought into that. It's the same business. I mean, I've worked with managers like that in a professional context, John, same as you have. And I've worked for, I remember one of the bosses I worked for, he's a great guy. And at certain seasons, he in the beginning season, when I first joined, and it was very small, he was brilliant. He was just absolutely fantastic. But towards the end, essentially, the trust, the relationship with those people that he was responsible for working with, it just snapped, and they'd lost all patience with him. And so it just became constantly antagonistic. And I haven't seen it work. I've seen the same issue in the world, I think, in terms of secular jobs, is there comes a point you just run out of steam. And I think that's the danger, actually. And this is why buying's such an important issue, John.
Yeah, it's huge.
I think actually you can get it wrong. You can get it wrong quite a lot of times. I mean, don't get me wrong, you can get it wrong a lot of times, but there is sometimes a point where it starts to get more and more difficult to get buy-in the more and more you've pushed on.
Yeah. So what should people do? So, I mean, you think of MLG Network, but there might be others as well who are listening in. And what if you do get that sense that, okay, I just sense I'm not getting the buy-in. I sense that maybe the change, that bank account's a little bit low. I've struggled a little bit, relationally. It feels like it's coming from me, but people are up for what's the kind of a rescue plan? We haven't preempted this at all. I mean, it's just
making this up as we go along.
Making it up as we go along. But how would you suggest? What are some steps people could take?
I mean, so I can only say how I would handle it. And I think what I would do is I would get my key people in the room, maybe not all together, but certainly in small groups, not just on their own. And I would sit down and I would say, guys, I really just feel like I've obviously in some of the ways I've led, I've not necessarily led well. I think, I think you've got to have a really frank conversation, and basically you've got to be, I think almost at that point, you've almost got to willingly sit down and say, I'm willing to walk away, almost like I'm willing to get out of the way if you think that's right. And this is, I mean, we've, our previous video on conflict, you've got to almost push for conflict. I think you've almost got to say, let's have this out. Let's just really get it out on the table. Let's be really honest with one another. Let's really just, say what is going to, even if you think it's going to hurt me, say it, because it's the only thing that rebuilds trust is honesty. And I think, and an honesty and a coming together of people where there's a real unification of heart, where you're like, look, I've said everything I wanted to say. You've said, in a sense, you've really listened to me, and actually we can start to build together again on a basis of unity. I think that's probably the only way. But it's, again, you've got to take a lot of courage to do that. I think it takes a lot of courage to do that.
You do, and I've seen it happen. So certainly where outside of the local church, in fact, to be honest, in the local church in Canterbury, we actually had someone come in externally. So it did work there. I'm wrong. Well, actually, we had someone come in with a fresh pair of eyes. And that was really helpful, and a combination of, just looking at some of these issues about change and how people change. And we were particularly looking at how do you go from a church of, 100 and, break the 200 barrier. And that was hugely helpful because it was a learning process together where someone externally who we respected. It was actually from the same church, same network. It was the FIEC. And took us through a whole load of stuff about church growth and anticipated things and said, we've done it before. And actually we grew as a leadership, but we could also say to a number of people, you know what? Yeah, we've got this wrong and we haven't thought about this. But actually, thanks to, Ray, who's come in to help us, we've now got a plan. And people respected that. They respected the fact that we actually brought other people in. I'm not saying that works every time, but having an external person come, maybe do some coaching, as you know, we should do an episode on coaching. I love coaching. Yeah, I'm training as a coach, but I think there's hugely helpful kind of tools for leaders. They don't sound particularly spiritual, although I would argue that Jesus was the greatest coach of all. He asked great questions. He helped people find the answers for themselves, to own the solutions. I could go on, but there is room to bring people in. It's probably probably what I'd say on that.
I think it's great. I think maybe we've painted a bit of a negative picture about this situation. I think it's, or certainly I have. But I suppose I just see it go wrong. I think I've seen it, and I think unfortunately it does often happen in leadership. Is the lack of buy-in. I think the whole external thing is really important. As you totally agree with you. Like that's my role, is often to go in and help sort out some of those issues. And my number one thing is, can I rebuild trust? Can I get these people being actually honest and open with each other? That's the key. And there's got to be a heart for forgiveness. Again, I think there's got to be a heart to want to, and I think that's the key. But yeah, I mean, I just think this whole subject of buying is so important. I really think it's important, John. I think you've been absolutely right to raise it. And we talked about
it's great. And I think we probably should finish there, shouldn't we? But I'm looking forward also to another discussion. It's based on another question that's come in actually about how we lead through others, because some of this can seem like, oh, it's me and mileage. How do I get people to buy in through me? But of course, one answer is actually when we're leading through other people, like actually we're leaders, because true leaders create more leaders. They don't create followers, they create more leaders. So when people see that you're leading through them, that they're bringing their gifts to the table, that you're helping them to walk, Ephesians 2:10, you're helping them to walk in the footsteps that God has actually ordained in advance of them, that they can see that you're working through them. That also sort of breeds trust, and it helps to develop people. So I think there's something there about our buy-in, how we're leading and how we're doing so. Not, as we come back to what we started with, really, it's not just me and kind of my message to, yes, this is the message of, that I want you to follow and just follow me, but actually doing that together as a team and having that kind of developing others around us is so key to buy-in as well. But again, it's a topic for another day.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, John, that's been a brilliant discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Good to hope it's been helpful. If you have found this helpful, we encourage you just to like the video. You can like it. You can subscribe to get all of our videos. I always feel like one of those like kind of YouTubers my kids watch when I kind of say like and subscribe. But yeah, it's good. If you want to catch any of our other videos, you can do on our playlist for doing that. But yeah, so thanks so much, John, and until next time.
See you later.
See you, matey.
Bye.